Hi, everybody. I'm Pete Rohrbaugh from phoning in from Marietta, Georgia, at Southern Polytechnic State University, and with me, as has been for almost all of the last 8 weeks, every week, is Rabia Chaudry. So, Rabia, welcome back to our maybe one of our last conversations about cereal.
Hi, Pete. Good to see you again after a couple of weeks, and I hope you can hear me okay. I apologize to anybody who's watching because I've been under the weather and my throat is recovering. So,
Yeah, you had to go grab some medicine right before you got on camera, so we'll see how far we can get. Also, you lost your voice, it sounds like, a couple of days ago.
I did, yeah. It's back though.
Hmm.
You can't keep it down for too long, but I mean, I was doing interviews because Thursday was the last episode. People wanted interviews like on Thursday and on Friday, and it was killing me, but I was still pushing through. Then by Saturday, I couldn't.
Hmm.
I just sounded like a train wreck. So
Let's talk about those interviews for a minute.
sure.
Um, where do you feel like you've gotten the most kind of interesting reception?
I mean, I think my timepiece resonated a lot with people. Even though I've done a number of I did an interview with the AV podcast. I did one with the Friendly Atheist blog, and we used to be on the same blogging site, so he was a colleague. Um, but I haven't gotten like tremendous feedback from those, but I've gotten a lot of feedback just from the Time article that I did, and I did that the same day that the last podcast came out.
Mm-hmm.
And that was Thursday was a rough day. I mean, I was really sick. I was getting, after the podcast, obviously, a bajillion people reach out to you to ask what you think, how are you going to respond, what are you going to blog.
Right.
So, and my editor from Time just wanted, I had told them I would do, and the funny thing is, like, normally when I write for Time, it's about faith issues
Mm-hmm.
or something related to American Muslims. And then when I write for New America Foundation, it's always national security stuff. But both of the outlets asked me to write about cereal. So, at the time they wanted it the same day, so I knocked it out. I was like, I hope this makes sense. And for New America, I'll be doing it in the next week or so, or a couple of weeks, yeah.
Did you write that? Did you write the bulk of that timepiece or any of that timepiece before the last episode
Oh,
ran?
no, not at all. No, that was that same afternoon.
Okay. And my question was more to the point of where. I mean, I appreciate knowing where you feel like people have been reading or attending to what you're doing the most, but kind of as we've been talking about media outlets and how they have approached the story, I'm curious to hear about how what media outlet or interviewer do you feel like has worked with you and approached the story from the most interesting angle, like asked the best questions and approached it with kind of like the freshest eyes? Is that a hard question to answer?
I would say most recently an interviewer who works with Dawn newspaper, and Dawn is a huge newspaper, English newspaper in Pakistan,
Mm-hmm.
which is odd. It's not published here, but I mean, it's found online.
Mm-hmm.
But it is the leading English newspaper in all of Pakistan. And her questions were great because, she's also she's Pakistani Canadian, but she understands the cultural implications. Um, and she also understands the kind of impact it would have being read overseas, especially in light of, U.S.-Pakistan relations and stuff. So her questions were great. Her piece was really good. Um, Beyond that, a lot of people kind of had this. A lot of interviewers had many of the same questions. I mean, last week, a reporter from the Baltimore Sun wanted to just do a profile on me, which was, I guess, a different take on it, but that didn't necessarily contribute to a non-story, I think. Um, but to be honest, a lot of the outlets had mostly the same questions. But I think the Dawn piece was really strong, and
Mm-hmm.
it was quite comprehensive.
Mm-hmm. Um, I wanted to get kind of my questions lined up that we talked about before. What about, let's start with this one. How do you feel, what's your reading on how the community of people that are around you supporting Adnan? I mean, I put up the link to the Time magazine piece so people can read, and probably anybody who's watching has probably already kind of scoured the internet for all that kind of stuff and read it. And we could talk more about your your professed disappointment in the end of the show. How do you feel like the community has received the show now that it's finished? Is it we've talked about this a lot, like spread out over the last couple of weeks, but is there a consistent kind of feeling like I wish this had gone a different way, or is there a kind of appreciation of the fact that that Sarah dealt with it the way that she did? What's your read on how people in your community in the area are receiving it?
I think it's a mix of both. I think, first of all, let me say that it wasn't that I felt disappointment in the way it ended.
Mm-hmm.
Because for me, this experience has been about Sarah's investigation, right? Not about the show so much.
Mm-hmm.
So the disappointment for me was not even in that Sarah did everything humanly possible and maybe beyond that to find the truth. She really did. I never mean to suggest that she didn't try hard. She did everything she could.
Mm-hmm.
The disappointment was that there was nothing that still was like so clear, right? That would clearly exonerate him. And that's what I obviously, when I contacted media, that's what I was hoping, that a journalist would find something like that was a real smoking gun in favor of Adnan.
Mm-hmm.
Having said that, the appreciation still is that she brought to light how much reasonable doubt was in this case. In fact, she created even more reasonable doubt than there was 15 years ago, right? Mm-hmm. She told the story that the jurors didn't know. She told the story the world didn't know. And there's so many people, and I was talking to Adnan last night, and he had spoken to my brother Saad during the day, and my brother was telling, and Adnan hasn't heard the last episode, obviously. He hasn't read the transcripts yet. I haven't gotten them to him. And so my brother was saying to Adnan that, I guess he was saying that he was disappointed. Because I think, my brother really wanted, and of course I would have loved for Sarah to say, okay, I didn't find anything smoking, but I definitely think he's innocent, right? But she came, I think, as close as she could to saying that, while leaving her the space of maintaining credibility if something happened otherwise. Mm-hmm. Anyhow, my brother was telling Adnan that. And so when Adnan spoke to me, he said that he was trying to explain to my brother, listen, before this show aired, he said, I was just a convicted murderer. For 15 years, the whole world only saw me as guilty. He said, except for the 3 or 4 people like you and Rabia and a few, my family. He said, for the rest of the world, I was guilty. Like now, if there are 10 people who think I'm innocent, that's 10 people more than there were a year ago. If there's 10,000, that's 10,000. So Adnan is very, very grateful, even though, it's really brought new life into this case. And I think most people in the community feel like that. They're like, oh, darn, we wish there was something that was. But at the same time, people are like, wow, we didn't know what little it took to convict him. Because most people didn't attend the full trial. And those details are not in newspapers.
Right.
A newspaper just reports so-and-so is convicted. It's just, which I think is like, what kind of reporting is that? Like, it doesn't tell you why or how. So, I think the community's response was pretty much like mine. It's like, we wish it had been something much more compelling for his innocence, but we're grateful for what the show did and what Sarah did.
Mm-hmm. What about the ethics of reporting and the ethics of being an audience member to Serial? This is the second part of that question, is the thing that I've thought about for most of the time that we've been talking. In the last 2 or 3 weeks, I've seen a larger, maybe 4 or 5 articles that have popped up questioning Sarah Koenig's ethics in approaching this story the way that she's approaching it. And I don't mean the kind of white privilege critique that we saw, a month ago, but something along the lines of, it's inappropriate for her to discuss this case this way. It's inappropriate for her to decide this person or that person needs to be named or doesn't need to be named.
But she doesn't decide that. She never decided that. She would let people decide that. Everybody she interviewed, they decided how they wanted to be represented.
Mm-hmm.
Either you could use their full name, or you could use their first name, or you couldn't use any of their names, like Kathy, right? Kathy,
mm-hmm.
or Neighbor Boy.
Mm-hmm.
Or Sarah didn't make those decisions.
Right.
She respected the decisions of the people she contacted. But anyhow, I'm sorry, I interrupted your question.
No, I mean you're right, and I mean we've talked about that a couple of times about the way that she went about deciding about the use of names. This critique, I think, I need to put up a link to it. The more kind of compelling one, because when I first started reading it, I was not on board with it. I was frustrated by it. The more I looked at it, I don't agree with it, but I think it's an interesting critique that that along the lines of how somebody can look at something like America's Most Wanted or something that has way less journalistic integrity, that serializing this kind of a journalistic project and building an architecture to it that on purpose is trying to accumulate, attract attention, delay the final answer, the whole serialization of it, that is unethical. I don't agree with that argument, but it's been made in more interesting ways in the last couple of weeks than I've seen it made before. So, what do you think about that?
I think the power of the way it was told is in the fact that she was reporting as she went.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the whole thing had been reported in advance and then just thrown on the air, that would have limited access to so many other people who've come forward.
Mm-hmm.
So many other people have come forward because they've listened to the podcast, and they're like, and that changes not just the narrative, but it changes Adnan's chances, even at appeal. For example, Summer, who was with Hay at school later than the prosecution said Hay was there. Right? The state said that Hay left the school at 2:15. This girl Summer's like, no, I was with her, like an hour later at the school or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So that wouldn't have happened. So while I understand people's discomfort, because what this is, but this is reality TV is pretty much like this, right?
How do you mean?
I mean, reality TV does the same thing in many ways. It's following people's lives in a chronological order, right? But it's allowing those people to, it's edited, so definitely the producers have, a director has a hand in how it's shown.
Mm-hmm.
But it's us looking into people's lives, which is, I think, what people were most uncomfortable about here, and really the most look, I can't speak of journalistic ethics because I'm not a journalist,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know even what those ethics necessarily are, other than protect your sources and don't exploit people, right? And I don't think she did either of those things. I think the most discomfort that I heard was from people saying, well, she's talking about all these people who are connected to the case and putting them in the public spotlight, right? Like Jay or Jen Pusateri. But that's a matter of public record, and she has a right to do it. And any writer, any journalist could have dug up the story and done the exact same thing.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, she was much more forgiving because she allowed people like Jay and Jen and others to say, use my full name, use my last name, use my whatever.
Right.
Whereas any other journalist could be like, I'm printing it all because it's public record.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, if I'm talking really loudly, it's because I can't hear much. So I can't gauge my level.
It's all right. You're good on my side.
Screaming. I don't even know.
You're good on my side.
Okay. So for me, I understand the discomfort, but for that, at least, look, my interest here is getting information for Adnan's case. This was a more powerful method of doing it. Simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's my agenda, and I kind of don't really care about the rest of it.
Right. And you've been very clear about that all the way along. We started talking about motive and agenda right from the beginning, and how yours and Sarah's and her team were going to be different. How even your motive and mine in setting something like these conversations up have been different. Though oftentimes have kind of tracked in similar directions. What about shifting back to a question that we've talked about before, which is the ethics of, and I think that this may resonate with people that are fans of the show, the ethics of being a consumer of this kind of story. And that's kind of a big, complicated question for us to wrap our heads around, but maybe we could start with what it has felt like for you to encounter people who who only know about Adnan through Serial, who've only listened to Serial, and want to talk about how good it is, or how entertaining it is, or how much they're shaping their lives around Thursday morning episodes coming out and all of that stuff. Have you gotten a feeling through the sense of through the reporting that that feels exploitive or almost like a carnival?
Um, I think it has carnival-like aspects and potential, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why the show is entertaining, and that's why 6 million people listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not stupid. I know it's the sheer entertainment value,
Mm-hmm.
and this, for people not so many people for weeks didn't know if it was fiction or nonfiction, right? So it wasn't about so much like the people in the story. It was about this really amazing, interesting whodunit. So I get that. I think, there is always going to be, every time I feel that discomfort, I have to push it aside because I have to look at the utility of that attention, right? And be pragmatic about it. But what I think is really weird for me, the one thing I cannot push aside is, so, Adnan's family is very private, generally speaking, right? And then, the younger brother, Yusuf's really young, and his parents aren't public people, and the older brother's like, Rabia, you kind of, you take care of the interacting with the public for us. And so as I've done so, it's the treatment of people like, like towards me, like I have some kind of agenda other than the fact that I love and care about Adnan. And it's amazing to me that people can come into my face, however you want that to look like, on a private message or in the Twitter sphere or on a Facebook message, and be like, yeah, well, we think Adnan XYZ. And I don't know why they don't understand that this is not a character. This is somebody I care and love. I care about and love. And I just wonder if it was Adnan's mother, like, would they say that to her mother, his mother, that, well, screw you, we think he's guilty of sin, and he should rot in jail. And I'm not his mother, but I am like a sister, like he's like a brother to me.
Mm-hmm.
And the ease with which people can say that is really startling to me. It's like we're coming from a place of sincerity where we think he's been victimized, right? And his family's been victimized, and the people who love him are victims here. And you're like, you don't have the right, you shouldn't do that to people who are like already victimized by a system, right? So I on the other hand now, the kindness of strangers has also been overwhelming. I've gotten hundreds, if not thousands, of messages of support and prayers. And look, since Friday we started his fundraising campaign, we've raised, like, I think $24,000 already in a few days.
Mm-hmm.
So these are strangers mostly donating.
Mm-hmm.
It goes both ways, and I think there will be a core group of people, like the ones who watch these Google Hangouts, the ones who read all the blogs, who are looking at this as not entertainment, and as something that has an impact, on real people. But for most people, they don't have the time for that. It's just something to listen to on their drive or their jog or whatever, and it's okay. I don't expect everybody to be
right
in, head first and investing their life in it.
I had this weird moment a day or two ago when somebody showed me, I think it was my wife that showed me the Saturday Night Live skit that was the Serial, kind of like the Serial parody.
I thought.
And I thought that you would have.
Yeah.
I remember seeing the one early on, 2 or 3 weeks into the series, about the people discussing how obsessed they were, and this thing, this podcast about this podcast, and you remember that one.
Yeah.
And I remember looking at that and thinking, that's funny. It's chewing over the kind of public consumption of this piece of media. And I'm a huge Saturday Night Live fan. I mean, they rarely do anything that pushes a button for me or offends me. But I knew I was too close to this story when I watched that skit, and I mean, I thought it was funny the way that they set it up with the music and everything, and but then when it got to the part where somebody was reading the lines as if they were Adnan,
Yeah,
that felt
yeah,
I didn't like that.
yeah. I know that bothered me too. It bothered me. I mean, they kind of poked fun at every, all the, at Dana, at Sarah, at Christina Gutierrez. They had to characterize it. I mean, look at Jingle, right?
Mhm.
Jingle was a complete character of what we've heard about Jay.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I mean, for Saturday Night Live, part of being funny is being a little bit offensive, I guess.
Yeah.
It was still funny, but if nothing else, it was a commentary on like the popularity of the show,
Yeah.
right? On where, how, and when I talked to Don last night, I said, it was on Saturday Night Live, and he was like, what? Like he could, and I told him, I said, I didn't even know how to explain it. There's a part of me that didn't I want to, because I was like, oh, there was this Chris Kringle character that was supposed to be you. He's like, what?
Mhm.
It was just weird,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, to me, it's from a distance, it just means that it is cereal is a part of our pop culture now.
Yeah. Of course.
Yeah, that's what it is.
Mhm.
But
Which means that everyone who's a character in Serial is part of pop culture. I mean, it means you are. Um,
maybe, I'm so glad I didn't make an appearance in the skit.
I was waiting for it. I really was waiting for it.
Yeah, it would have been funny. No, I mean, I don't think I'm so much. I think, I'm on the periphery because I'm not even in this show. Look, so Sarah had done a final interview with me a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
I mean, we spent quite a lot of time together, and none of it made it, to the last thing. And so I don't think necessarily that I'm so much of it. I'm just here as an advocate for Adnan, and I have forcefully inserted myself as the one to tell his narrative, whether anybody likes it or not.
Mhm.
Um, but in terms of pop culture, I don't have people banging down my door, right? Like it's not like that. It's not like that.
Right. I wonder, just to finish up this question about um, audience ethics and stuff like that, you said essentially that you've kind of endured the onlooker effect from other people because there's a utility to it. It's bringing attention to the case. It's mm, putting the case in front of an audience that's larger than would have ever seen it, and so you just have to kind of like deal with whatever comes from that. I wonder if it would be different if somebody who had an emotional attachment to this whole narrative and didn't have that kind of um, motive, didn't have that kind of agenda. Somebody like people who are friends or family members of Hay, they don't have an agenda to push. They don't have a motive, and so I wonder. I guess out loud to myself, but to you, if you want to address that, if you think that they would answer that question differently.
Yeah, I'm positive they would answer that question differently. I mean, we know even from that post that I think, was apparently her brother posting that it is not easy for them, to see all of this opened up, to hear their daughter's name, his sister's name just said like it's, like you said, a part of pop culture, right? Um, there's memes, there's hashtags. I can't imagine how hard it is for them, and I'll be honest, I don't. I kind of like I only have space in my like I only have enough emotional space to take up so much. Like I can't deal with the spectrum
Hmm.
of discomfort and pain and grief and all that is going to affect different people differently who are all connected to this case. I just don't have the capacity to do that. I can't function if I did that.
Hmm.
I've thought about them, and I keep thinking and hoping that if her brother listened to the whole thing, that he also realized that maybe it's not, maybe the person who killed Hay is not, behind bars, and that sense would would allow them to feel generous enough to keep this happening. And what's interesting is like we haven't heard from that guy again
Mhm.
or the family at all. And I don't know if that's because they want to see where Sarah's going to take this. They want to see what the results are. Maybe, you know, look. I don't know what it would be like to lose somebody in my family the way they lost Hay.
Mhm.
But if you compounded it with another injustice, where somebody who's innocent, or you think might be innocent, is behind bars, I think that would be even more painful for the average person.
Mhm. Mhm.
I mean, there are people who, have pardoned, like the people who murdered their loved ones after like 20 years, whatever. There are people who've done that. But if you're in a position where you're like, maybe it's been the wrong person all this time,
Mhm.
not only does that mean that person's life was destroyed and his family's life, but also the person who killed your daughter means they're still out there. So I just hope and pray that that's their perspective on it. Um, but I think they're just very private people. I know if I was in their position, I probably would have wanted to be more public and said, this is how we feel or don't feel. They certainly were entitled to
Mhm.
say
Mhm.
that we don't want any of this. We are upset about this. We're offended by it. It's hurting us. They
Mhm.
were entitled to say it. And if that's how they felt, they should have said it.
Yeah. Yeah, when you talk about how you don't have the capacity to think about things, completely from their perspective because you have your own. I mean, that's a really honest representation because, like you're saying, you would be paralyzed. It would prevent you from being able to do anything on Adnan's behalf because you were, bogged down by imagining that other experience.
And the thing is, again and again, like everybody has to realize that I did not even know that this was going to be like a serialized show.
No.
I thought it was going to be a 1 hour This American Life radio show,
Yeah.
which I actually thought would have very little impact. What
Mhm.
I thought was going to be important about this whole thing was Sarah's investigation.
Mhm.
That Sarah would investigate for all these months, and she would come up with something, and then they would do it. The show didn't matter. It was what she produced or what she found that would matter.
Mhm.
So I didn't know it was going to be like this, and certainly nobody knew it was going to be this popular, right?
Mhm.
So going in, and then once it began, it wasn't really something that could be shut down, really.
It took on a complete life of its own.
Yeah, it did. It did. And, I think I don't know if that's any consolation to Hayes' family, if this was hard for them.
Mhm.
It was also hard for, I mean, I asked Adnan, I said, I can't remember which transcripts I sent you. I owe you 3 or 4 more. And he said, you know what? Don't worry about it, Rabia.
Mm.
He's like, you don't have to send them to me. Um,
Really? So you think
yeah.
you think he's kind of like gotten like he's over it?
It's not so much that he's over it. I mean, I think for him, it's like the trial all over again, where he just sits and people are discussing him, and he
Yeah.
has no power to say anything,
Right. Although, I mean, from another perspective, he had way more to say in
Oh
in,
yeah.
in this hearing than he had in the previous one.
He was able to listen. He spoke to Sarah what for 40, 50 hours, but how much did we hear of him on the podcast? Maybe an hour's worth?
Yeah, I mean, not a ton, but I mean
No, definitely more than we
more
did
than
15
more
years
than
ago.
anyone else besides Sarah.
Yeah, but guess what? If Adnan had edited the program or I had edited it, we might have heard different parts of his
Of
conversation.
course.
So even then, the power is in Sarah's hands to decide
Hmm.
what he says and what it sounds like.
Yep.
It really is.
Yeah. Yeah. He's still his narrative is still controlled by somebody else. His story
It
is.
is. I mean, now I obviously do my best to hijack it, but it's not the same as obviously him getting a chance to
Mm.
to tell say what he wants to say. And even then, it wigs him out because he's like, what can I say and how can I say it that people won't be like, well, was that manipulative? Why did he hesitate there?
Well, just like that big long letter that he wrote to her that she read.
Right, right. Or why did his voice suddenly sound lower? Or like can you imagine if like every single sound that came out of your mouth was scrutinized? So it's hard for him. It was hard for him. But he is really. But believe me, even last night, he's like my his case and his chance at appeals wouldn't be where it was
Mm-hmm.
if it wasn't for Sarah's work.
Mm-hmm.
So he's extremely grateful.
Yeah. There's a whole direction that I feel like I need to think more about before I throw this other question out there. So I'm gonna just bookmark that thing in my head to come back to. But it has to do with this spectrum that you're talking about of how much you can actually carry around, how much understanding or compassion or empathy or identification of other people's connections to something like this you can carry around if it excludes your own, or if it kind of like crowds out your own. And I keep thinking about this from the audience member's perspective and the vast spectrum of care that people have had as I've talked to them about. I mean, just in the last couple of days, like I was standing in line to get coffee. We were getting brunch, and these two women were discussing. Like I just heard them say podcast 3 times in the same minute. And I said, "Are you talking about cereal?" And they said, "Yeah, yeah." And so, we talked about it for 30 seconds before I walked away, and I just thought, man, like a huge range of reception on something like that. And I wonder.
I was at a restaurant about a week ago, 10 days ago, and it's a Pakistani restaurant, so mostly Pakistanis go there, and it's like this really hip new place, so a lot of young people. And I'm just sitting, and these girls come up to me like really like tentatively, and they're like, "Are you Rabia Chaudry?" I'm like, "Yes, I am." And they're like, "Oh my gosh, we're fangirls, we're this," and I'm like, "This is so weird," because I'm there with like friends and my family.
Mm-hmm.
And they wanted to get a picture, and I'm like, oh my God, no. So yeah,
But I mean, I totally see what you're saying. But then again, like, what are you gonna do? Like, are you gonna, you're not gonna say no, leave me alone.
Well, I actually kind of said in a very nice way no to the picture, because I was like, I wasn't feeling well then either. I said, I'm really under the weather. I was like, I'm sure we're all local. I'll run into you again, but I'm just like not feeling well. But we talked for a while. They wanted to know about the case. They wanted to know how they could help, and I did. And I do my best to, even when people message me, to be responsive, to honor their interest, whatever that may be. But it does take time to get back to everybody. But yeah, the range of interest is, and the thing is, I feel like it's even though the show's over. Like the BBC recently bought it. I think they're going to start. I don't know if they've started playing it. They're going to play it over there. But the BBC.
You mean on the radio?
BBC Radio recently bought the rights to Serial.
Huh.
So.
That's weird. I wonder how you buy the rights to something that is sitting out there for everyone to.
I mean, they'll play it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think any other radio show can just say we're going to play Serial.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, even WBEZ didn't. They only played the first 2 or 3 episodes. The rest was online.
Right.
But they're actually, I think, going to play the whole thing. And so I think the interest on this will come in waves, and it will continue.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people who are just kind of catching up to it now,
Mm-hmm.
So there are people who are just like, oh my God, I just heard the first one, or I'm just getting on the bit. So I think it's not going to go away immediately. Mm-hmm. It will happen, and I think with the legal stuff that's going to happen in the next 6 months, 1 week to 6 months,
mm-hmm.
There will be continued interest too.
Mm-hmm.
The state is paying attention.
Yeah, let's talk about that. This was a whole other kind of bundle of questions that I had. So let's go there. And can you tell us, what you know about the mechanics of all of that stuff that's coming in January?
So I know that. So Adnan's lawyer had filed a petition, and he's going to be filing an amendment to that petition soon. That's going to be, I think, really interesting to people. And I don't know if I can get my hands on it, but I'll try to share the whole thing if I can. And then the state is supposed to respond by the 15th, but I have a feeling when they get the amendment, they might ask for more time to respond. And then the court has to decide what they want to do with it. The court can be like, yeah, we'll give you an extension, or no, you need to give us your response, and then we're going to have a hearing on this. Or we're going to remand it back to the lower court, to be heard again. There's lots and lots of ways it could go. And then Innocence Project, their motion is like ready to go. I just don't know when they're going to file it. And that really depends. The state could be on board and say, fine, here's the evidence, test it, or they could fight it. We just don't know. I think the state will fight it because that's kind of what we've seen from the state so far. Or maybe it's just my assessment. I just feel like, they're not that cooperative. They were not happy that Adnan was talking to our reporter. Apparently, and actually I never noticed this even though I talk to him all the time, when he makes a call, there's a recording before you can connect that says that you're not allowed to record the calls. And, well, that's what Sarah's been doing, right?
Wow.
And I think it wasn't even purposeful. It was just like nobody really paid attention. It's like one of those disclaimer type of, you don't really pay attention. Mm-hmm. You wait for it to be over so you can press 1 or whatever and talk to him. And so he recently was told, like somebody from the state called the prison and said, yeah, he's not supposed to be making calls that are recorded. But, the show's over now, so.
Yeah, good luck.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is what it is over now. But, but that actually could have had an impact on him. They could, it wasn't malicious, though. Like, they just didn't realize it. But, it's, and they have a right. I mean, I understand that. It makes sense not to have inmates be calling and recording things. I mean, why not? So definitely they're paying attention, and we'll see. We'll see what happens. I mean, right here there's like 3 or 4 different teams, like legal teams, working on this. So there's another team of lawyers. Oh yeah, with the fundraising, we just the team of lawyers who are volunteering to be part of a board of trustees for his legal defense fund, the trust, mm-hmm. And we're actually still kind of going through the formalities of creating that as a legal entity.
So it's going to be a nonprofit?
No, it can't be a nonprofit because it's not a charitable purpose, apparently. So I mean, this is so beyond my pale of legal knowledge that these people have figured it out that it can't be it has to be a trust, and we'll be trustees for Adnan, and the money will be used for his legal defense, including investigations and all kinds of other things. And so we started fundraising for that on Friday. So.
Mm-hmm. And that is to pay for legal fees for him going up against appeals or things like that. Are there any other things that trust is set up to do?
It'll be obviously for lawyers' fees, and if he ends up getting a new trial, that's a whole other chunk of money, right? Or a new post-conviction appeal. So definitely it's for attorney fees. We do want to hire some great private investigators, which we haven't done. His lawyers have had PIs, but I mean, like independent, ex-law enforcement, ex-CIA type of people. Mm-hmm. Some really crack private investigators. Mm-hmm. And then maybe offer a reward, Mm-hmm. So those are things that we're thinking about. There's lots of other things, there might be certain tests that experts we can hire. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But the expenses rack up. And so, we just want to be prepared.
Mm-hmm. And Adnan is obviously supportive of all of that.
So he was uncomfortable. He was a little bit uncomfortable with it, to be honest.
Okay.
He was like, I don't want people to think I'm asking for money, or that's why, this show. Like he's just not that kind of person, and neither is his family. Mm-hmm. So I said to him that, listen, whatever efforts people who are supporting you are making, they're kind of independent of you, okay? Mm-hmm. So if we didn't do this and tomorrow we suddenly needed $20,000 for attorney's fees, we still would have to somehow fundraise for it. We've been, over the years I have done this, on and off, even when I lived in Connecticut, we would need a few extra grand and I would ask people or I would gather it together or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I said to him, you just don't worry about it, these are supporters, right, of yours who are doing this for you, and it's not you asking for money. Mm-hmm. It's us asking for money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. I don't want to keep you on too much longer because I can tell that your voice is starting to get raw. But
I'm starting to get full of mucus. Yes.
Yeah, I can tell. We'll leave off here in a minute, but I want to come back to something we talked about maybe 3 weeks ago, where you said early on, I used the word activist for your work on Adnan's behalf, and you said, "Well, I'm more of an advocate than an activist." And then a couple of weeks ago, it seemed like you had changed your mind on that, and you did feel like your work was skewing more towards activism than advocacy.
Mm.
What is that boundary, and what do you feel like changed?
I mean, I think it's maybe it's semantics, you know,
Okay.
but to me, an advocate is somebody who is kind of a bit of a passive role,
Hmm.
where you know, like I support him. If people want to know about the case, I can tell them. If people need documentation, I can give it to them. I'm just kind of this repository of whatever support is needed, resources, you know, to help with his
Right.
case.
Like an archive.
Right, right. And but not necessarily putting myself face front, being in the public, talking to people,
Writing about it every week.
writing about it, engaging on it. That to me is activism. And so definitely my role totally changed. You know, my engagement with Sarah was as an advocate. I didn't start writing about this case when I contacted Sarah. I
Hmm.
was just quietly waiting to see what happened.
Right.
Um, but just the medium of the show, the weekly podcast, the immediate response online, I just realized that this is going to require some really active engagement.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I've done my share of activism in the past, and I really, about 5, 6 years ago, had decided that I'm kind of too burnt out to be an activist on anything anymore.
And then
Um,
then came cereal.
then I kind of have to do this, and even now, you know, I want to help with the fundraising,
Hmm.
and at some point, I'm not going to have anything to blog about anymore. I'll put out the documents. I'll do whatever. In fact, I'm putting up some documents today. Um, and then I'll be done. Then it's going to be back in the hands of the lawyers,
Hmm.
and I'll go back to my role of being, you know, an advocate for him, but not, you know, but not tweeting about it 35 times a day.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, we really learn in moments like this. I know, I mean, in a very different sense, we learn that the iron gets hot, and you've really got to, you've got to boost something at a particular time, and like timing is really important.
it is, and you know, a lot of people have said, just take some time off, and I'm like, this is not the time to take off. This
Right.
is the thing. I will take time off, but I know this is not the time. You know, especially like the last few days, well, the last 10 days while we were trying to get the fundraising mechanism up, it was so rough for me because I was like sick, I had work, and I was like, I really felt like I should just not like just disappear on from online for 2 weeks.
Hmm.
Not give. I actually did cancel a couple of interviews last week because I couldn't do it. I was burned out.
Hmm.
But the thing is, I can't. This is the time, right? Like if I say, okay, I'm gonna rest for a few weeks and I'll come back in February to start fundraising. That's stupid. So I'll rest later.
Yeah, that's sad. It's sad that it has to be that way, but I totally know that feeling.
People will be like, oh look, a cute cat, and they'll forget about it. Not.
Yeah. Well, there's so many cats.
There's a lot of cute cats out there.
So many cats. Um, well, I'm going to save this last question because it would take way too long, and I think so you and I have talked about organizing one more of these potentially next week in the same slot, so Monday 1 p.m., which would kind of be theoretically our actually last serial conversation. And we'll use this platform to invite people who have been viewers of our conversations throughout, that we'd like to have 4 or 5, 5, potentially 6 people
My
in.
brother wants to come back on too.
Mm-hmm. What? Say that again?
My brother wants to come back on.
God is always welcome.
Okay.
So yeah, that would be. I'm proposing that for next week, and you're on board with that schedule-wise.
Yep.
Although we can be flexible with that if people who want to participate in that and who are able to kind of make the commitment to be there, but they need that time shifted sometime else, maybe in January. We're flexible on that, but I would like to do it next week at Monday at 1. So if you've been a regular attendee to these conversations, or you come back to them after we post them, you can get in touch with me through email or Twitter or through comments. I'm already pretty certain about a couple of the people who would want to join us. I think even one of the moderators of the subreddit has been talking about what we've been doing, and I think that she probably would maybe be interested in joining us. We'll see, but expect that tentatively we'll be back next Monday at 1 p.m. with a bunch of other guests, and just have kind of an open-ended conversation without the, obviously my managing of these conversations is not super rigid, but I probably won't come with many questions at all, and would just want the people who are joining in with us to talk along with us.
Great. I think that would be excellent. It would be the first time I kind of engage with just the viewership like that, so that'll be good.
Right.
In January, I'm speaking at Stanford University, the law school,
Mm-hmm.
and that will actually be my real first, really public forum.
Is that about Serial, or is that related to New America?
It's related to Serial. Everything is related to Serial now. That's for Serial. My New America stuff is ongoing, but I've been invited specifically to talk about, because it's at the law school, to talk about the law and media advocacy, like how do lawyers use media as advocates for their clients. That's a Stanford Law. February 12th is at the University of Baltimore Law School, and I'm going to be actually with a panel of Adnan's actual lawyers too. Mm-hmm. So that'll be really interesting. I've been invited to speak at Princeton about this with their criminal justice group.
Wow.
So there's a lot of public kind of forums coming up, mm-hmm. and I'll be posting them on my blog so people can come, and I look forward to it. And the last thing if you don't mind, would you post the link for Adnan's fundraising site?
Yeah, of course. No, I'll attach that to this video, and I'll put it into my blog post that wraps up this conversation. But of course.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate that.
If you tweet that out too, I think that.
I've tweeted it 100 times.
I haven't been on Twitter in a couple of days, so I need to get that.
We just started on Friday. I was sick and half asleep in bed, and I was tweeting it out. Mm-hmm. I've been tweeting it.
Okay. And then the one last thing is that, as we've talked about a couple of times, we're probably going to take a break from these conversations through, after next week. But we both are in a little bit of conversation about how we could potentially extend this conversation beyond Serial and beyond Adnan's case. Mainly, that's selfish on my behalf, because I really appreciate talking with you every week, or even if we did it once a month. I think that there are just lots of kind of intersections of our own professions and kind of personal interests that would be valuable for me to explore. So
I think that could be fun. We could pick a different topic every month.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Okay.
So get in touch with us if you are interested in coming on camera with us next week. And unless that gets rescheduled, we will see you next week for our last live conversation about the Serial podcast. As always, we appreciate everybody who's watched, and we look forward to talking to you again. Take care, everybody.
Thanks. Bye, guys. Bye, Pete.